Welcome to And It's Live, the podcast which dives deep into football's most iconic seasons, stories, and what ifs. If you love football, history, tactics, and nostalgia, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and drop us a like on YouTube so you don't miss an episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the main event, the history of the Champions League. I am Martin, your host, as always. We are halfway through the group stage of 07-08 as the Champions League gets really big and complicated, and there's just so many stories to talk about that we can't possibly squeeze them into the time we used to have. But that means plenty more opportunities for David Edgar to talk, which he will be persuaded with his arm twisted all the way up his back. How are we doing, my man?
Well, normally, yes. The first group we're going to cover tonight, I'd really only like to talk about the first half and then pretend the second half didn't happen and move on to the next one for personal reasons for the team that I support. But we mentioned last week, and it's true, there's so many themes and subplots, which is probably to be expected as this expands, that, there's we started off, lads, we were talking about 8 teams in 2 groups. And, now we're festooned and surrounded by so many wonderful players and wonderful stories and things that were going on. And it becomes, very difficult to do them justice. And the type of people the three of us are, we would rather do 2 shows in which we get to drill down than do 1 show in which we get to give everything, a cursory look over. So, for the listeners, at least, I think it means more work for us. But hey, we're just that type of group of guys.
We're so giving.
What
top are you in? It looks, I don't believe it is, but it looks almost like a Zenit St. Petersburg top on this show of all shows. But
it is not a Zenit St. Petersburg top, although I actually own quite a lot of Zenit St. Petersburg merchandise. And the reason for that is I went on holiday. I'm not a spy, no, although that's exactly what a spy would say. But I went on holiday to Russia in 2006 with a friend who was, she's from St. Petersburg. So we went to Moscow for 5 days and we went to St. Petersburg for 8. We took in a Zenit St. Petersburg match. I went to the Zenit St. Petersburg club shop, as people do, and I bought a shitload of Zenit St. Petersburg stuff. I thought, I will cheer for Zenit St. Petersburg. And then 2 years later, the fuckers turned up and broke my heart. So that top has been sitting at the back of a drawer ever since, because obviously I can't ever wear it or people will assume that I support the wrong side of Glasgow. So yeah, that investment in post-Soviet football equipment was a bit of a waste of money.
Adam, you're just sober and black. How are we doing?
Happy to be here. I'm not sober and black. I've got my Festivus t-shirt on from Seinfeld.
Wonderful.
So it is the season at the time of recording. I'm doing good. Looking forward to even more tactical ramblings now. If we've moved to 4 shows, I think last week I said, was Wayne Rooney underrated? Or the week before, sorry. Last week I said Juan Mata. By the time we get to the end of these 4 shows, I'll probably be wondering if Pele was even that good after all. But yeah, happy to be here.
Skinner Badil beat you to that about 30 years ago, I think.
Worse than Jason Lee, if I remember correctly.
We'll save that, I think, for the better. Group E then. Okay. Rangers group, of course, with Stuttgart, Lyon, and the runaway favourites, Barcelona. I think in all the hundreds of shows I've done on this network, I'm not entirely sure I've really spoken about this group and this experience and whatever, because I've never done the later Smith years and all of that. So we might get into stuff that I haven't actually thought about for the best part of 15 years or whatever. But obviously a hugely impressive start. Looked like it was going to be a very typical European night at Ibrox, huffing and puffing, and then these continental types do what they do and go ahead. But the huffing and puffing seemed to work in the end. 2-1 victory over Stuttgart at home. A sensational night in Lyon.
Yeah.
We could have been battered. Absolutely battered. but it was sucker punch, counter-attacking football at its very, very, very best that evening. An incredible win in Lyon, and then a very credible 0-0 draw at home to Barcelona. Messi complaining about anti-football. Queiroz could have, sneaked it at the very end, and 7 points out of 9 at the halfway stage. This is incredible. I was one of the thousands, 20-odd thousand, that made their way to Barcelona for that middle game.
And littered.
I kept my rubbish to myself. Thank you, use the bin and whatever else. 6 minutes we lasted. Wee bit of chicanery, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it's handball.
Yes, it is handball.
Right. I remember him making another handball in a match that didn't affect the Scottish team, and it was never off the airwaves here. But
it certainly wasn't.
It's a handball.
And Messi tucked it away before half time. I think Sid Lowe's Guardian Weekly, because podcasts were just coming through really in terms of regular listening around that, for me anyway. Around that time, the Guardian Weekly was kind of one of my go-tos, and Sid Lowe said it's the only time he's ever seen a team settle for a 2-0 defeat, not having to worry about aggregate or anything like that. It was just like, no, this will do. We are not attacking. Thank you very much. Defeat in Stuttgart in a bit of a crazy game, really very annoyingly crazy game, I think it's probably fair to say. And then a kind of do or die battle at Ibrox against Lyon, 1-0, big chance missed, and then we got our payback for sucker punch counter-attacking brilliance with a young player called Karim Benzema looking pretty sharp for that money, and that 3-0 was turned around. We'll talk about us first then, because there is plenty to talk about with these other teams, guys. David, it's hard to... It's at the time almost impossible to start explaining this or understanding, comprehending what we're saying, because Walter Smith in Europe, other than our inaugural show here, was not a happy experience. It was tactically naive. It was an utter mess so often. And yet here we are in this particular situation. The Lyon away game reminded me very much of those old firm away games back in the 90s, where we would sit back, suck up and hit. And for whatever reason, in the 90s, never used that playbook, playing better teams than Celtic, but didn't use the tactics that seemed to kind of work okay in a game where we're going to be hit by quite a lot of pressure. He seemed to have learned quite a lot in his time away.
Yeah, he did. And I think part of it is the way things had changed. In the 90s, he would have been called out for playing like that in Europe. Not if it worked, given, but I think there was a feeling of Rangers were big spending and, should go on the front foot against these sides, but were taken apart just routinely. In this group, you see the group, the draw, and you think, oh, for Christ's sake, right? As Rangers going into just, Walter back in the chair about 6 months at this point, puts together virtually a new squad in the 2 windows. And you go into these matches. The first night at Stuttgart against Stuttgart is one of those nights you get at Ibrox, and Europe has seen it over the last few years, just to remind them that special things happen there when the crowd and the team get into a symbiosis. They're willing each other on. Go a goal behind, rather unfairly, I think, but then Charlie Adam with an absolute beauty, and then Jean-Claude Darcheville puts away a penalty, and Rangers win that match. The second one is the one that's in Lyon. I don't think had lost at home in the Champions League to this point. And going there just seemed like, I keep the numbers down, but Rangers are, as you say, terrific. Pace on the counter. Daniel Kuzan is flying. He is battering defenders. The most Marmite player, not that fans did, but if he wasn't in the mood, he was not turning up. It was that simple. He would go and he would stand on the field. I saw him hauled off against Motherwell after 50 minutes, having barely registered that he was on the park. But when he was on it, he could be unplayable. And DeMarcus Beasley was lightning quick. And it gave us that out ball. We've had Kevin Thompson, who played in that match on the tee, and he said, I've never been as tired coming off a football field, because the amount that we had to run to close space and block, but we knew that if we got the ball and got it over the top with a chance. It's a fabulous result. The result against Barcelona is a defensive masterclass. And of course, yes, you're right. It led to they didn't want to play football. Well, we're really sorry we didn't let you win. We know you're really good and you enjoy it, but it was a great performance from Rangers. We do go over there realistic. Let's not get scudded. The one that gets away from Rangers is Stuttgart away. A crazy game where it's the only game in the group where we're not as disciplined, I think, and we really could have got through that night. We take the lead, lose a goal right on halftime, which is never good. But even then, go 2-1 down and get back into it again with a goal in 70 minutes. 2 late goals here hurt us. A penalty from Juninho and Lyon, which gets them a draw against Barcelona, and a late winner for Stuttgart. So into the last game, and you called it right, a very painful evening indeed. I remember sulking off for a 2-day bender after this one because I was so disappointed. They take the lead early. Govou was a fine footballer, but the game is fairly even, and then Darsheville misses an open goal with a few minutes to go. It's an unmissable chance, and had he put it away, I have every faith that Rangers would have gone through. He didn't. I think to this day we'll wake up in the middle of the night wondering how he managed to miss it. And he wasn't an unreliable player, Darsheville. It was just a terrible miss. And then the Benzema show happened, and he had been outstanding all night, but 2 finishes. I don't think it's a 3-0 game, but they would probably argue neither was the first one.
They would, unfairly.
Yeah, unfairly. So I think the 2 late goals do give it a sheen that it doesn't really deserve. However, I do remember thinking at the time, he is different level. And, I don't class myself as a super scout or whatever, but sometimes you are aware you're in the presence of something that is another level. And, my nephews asked me about the time that I saw Lionel Messi at Ibrox. They say, "Oh, was he brilliant?" Oh, not really. No, he was quite quiet actually that night. I couldn't say the same for Benzema. He was just absolutely terrific, and of course we know what he went on to do. So we were right there. It is a tough group, and Rangers. I think at the start of it, if you'd said to us, "Would you be happy enough with third lads and go into the UEFA Cup?" I think we as Rangers supporters would have went, "Yeah, sure, absolutely." But after, the way it started, that was the extreme disappointment. Rangers go on to the most memorable of runs, to the UEFA Cup final, of course, and I don't think any of us would have missed that for the world. But there was that sense of, after putting ourselves in a great position, we just couldn't put it through. But I think if you look at the overall quality of the 2 sides who went through, there's no disgrace in finishing third and finishing above Stuttgart. Rangers will knock some good teams out on their way to the Europa League final. Fiorentina and Werder Bremen. Werder Bremen had beaten Real Madrid in this season's competition we spoke about last week. But Lyon were a super team. This is I think peak Lyon. This sort of era, Adam will fill it in, and we know about Barcelona. You read the names and it's like savouring a beautiful menu. They were a wonderful side. So ultimately ends in disappointment. Almost a very Scottish thing of snatching, it felt like. But in the end, it probably did come down to just one opportunity that we didn't take. So it was heartbreaking. It probably ended all right, given what we then went on to do. They had a wonderful story about the first match in the UEFA Cup when we played Panathinaikos. And years later, Chris Boyd had heard that Walter Smith actually wanted to go out in that because he didn't want all the extra games and to focus on the league challenge. And he went to see him and said, "I heard you wanted to go out in that game." And he's like, no. And he's like, you did, because you never picked me for matches and you played me up front on my own in Greece. So you clearly did. But yeah, it was just a disappointment. But again, I look at the names of the players involved in that group, and with all due respect to our squad, which was hard bitten, hard working, and we loved it. But the quality gap is enormous. They did well to get 7 points in that group.
They certainly did. Adam, the final game, and I know Darsheville has that chance, but Rangers weren't very good, and I did fear that night that we were going to be rabbits in the headlight. A draw would have done, and maybe just didn't know how to approach it, and we're just timid in ways that we hadn't really been previously. Just one of those kind of nights, I guess. So your thoughts on that and what's happening at Barcelona?
I think that might be your most asked question for me throughout this whole show. Yeah, how many times do you see a team needing a point and being caught between those two ideals of when to go and when not to go? Yeah, tricky one. I think just to the point on Walter Smith, I think undoubtedly going to the Premier League with Everton, and then Scotland and being the underdog more often than not, I think that's absolutely shaped his return back to Ibrox, and the lessons that I've learned. We're going to come on and speak about another Scottish manager who was gung-ho, and things changed and he changed to great success in this very season. So yeah, I think it's just evolution. It's just growing. But the man management of both of them was always their key skill, and I think you see that at points in this season for Rangers quite a lot. Maybe not so in these last few games, but yeah, I think it's just unfortunate. It did a very, very good unit here. I think to David's point, Sasa Papac did a number on Messi in that game. I think Messi threw the toys out the pram. That was probably the last time I've ever been annoyed at Lionel Messi. I think, but he threw his toys out the pram and declared it anti-football, famously, which is fair enough. Everyone's entitled to do what they need to do. But yeah, I think unfortunate. I think the way it started, those 7 points, very, very tough game. I think David spot on this. This was Lyon as the Lyon that we've been trailing, and as we know about. Benzema was ridiculous. Mendieta takes the plaudits. Riquelme takes the plaudits. Benzema is third for sure in terms of individual performances that I've personally been in the stadium for. And yeah, I think it was a really, really tough group. We acquitted ourselves well at points, but just never quite managed to fall for us. We've spoken about Barcelona. We've spoken about where they're going to be. I don't think anyone would really have thought they would get to where they will get to next season so quickly, but that's not taking anything away from how good they were here. Thierry Henry going there was terrific. Lots of interesting stuff to dive into probably in the next year on Henry in terms of the impact of Guardiola and how he basically, I think the quote, we'll get the specific quote for whenever that is, but basically had to learn how to play football again, which is fascinating for someone like Thierry Henry, who is one of the best players of the decade before. So we'll dig into all of that. But yeah, they're on fire at this point. I think doing really, really well. They have great players in there, but they're just waiting on, I think, someone to come in and just give them that extra 5-10% for me that turns collections of great players into fantastic teams, and that's certainly coming up soon. So yeah, not quite there for Rangers, much to our disappointment, especially like I said, when you get those 7 points in your first 3 games, and we know that 9 potentially gets you through. It did get Celtic through it, as we said, and 10 definitely does when you're that close to it. It definitely stings a bit.
I do remember on the message boards after the Lyon game, some furious fans. It's understandable from 7 points and then 0. This is a disgrace. No interested in UEFA Cup. No interested. It's not what you want to be. And some saying, well, if you get a ticket for the UEFA Cup final, because the ballot was just about opening then, I think, then you'll.
I got one.
You'll give it up, I'm sure, if the UEFA Cup doesn't.
Well, I got one in the ballot and avoided the ticket scramble, but also didn't give it up. I did want to be in the UEFA Cup rather than be completely out. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Right. Anyway, Manchester United then, Adam, very impressive in their group with Dynamo Kyiv, another one of our old favourites. 0. Bless them, rock bottom of this group. Sporting take the UEFA Cup place, and Roma, not as affected as perhaps other sides in Italy, of course. managing to go through as well. United, very, very impressive. They have something new in that lineup. They now have a trident of their own, Adam.
They do. And I think that is certainly a big part of it. But I think for me, we can't ignore the main part of it, which I think is this Cristiano Ronaldo rampage, if you like, to the top. He comes back from that 2006 World Cup, and there's quotes from Gary Neville basically saying he comes back and he's just transformed himself. Basically, he was thinking he might come back, and he's like, I'm not sure what state he's going to be in after everything that went there. But he said it was one of those cliches of he basically turned into a man over a month and was just huge. But seemed to come back with, I guess, a seriousness about him. Again, we spoke about Juan Mata and that personality or drive to push people out the way and say, this is my team, this is my club. I think when Cristiano Ronaldo comes back in that summer 2006, so the year before, there's absolutely no doubt that he wants to be the man. The tricks and flicks are all kind of gone. Still got one or two, but he's very much now obsessed with power, obsessed with scoring goals. Carlos Queiroz, I think, plays a huge part in this because obviously he's Portuguese, but he tactically has such a big influence, I think, on what Ferguson is doing at this point. He was a big fan of this strikerless approach, if you want to call it that. I know it's a 4-3-3 or a 4-5-1. Ronaldo plays up top a fair bit on his own, but when I say strikerless, I mean not an actual old-fashioned number 9 that we've been used to talking about on these shows. But yeah, he like I said, just seemed completely obsessed with scoring goals, and I think he was undoubtedly the biggest impact, I think, on how things went here. But take nothing away from Queiroz, take nothing away from Ferguson, take nothing away from the guys that we've spoken about there. René Meulenstein as well, I think, was here at this point as well, and was doing a lot of work with Ronaldo on the pitch, focusing on like how you visualise scoring goals and like I said, improving his heading ability. He was the type of player that you would think he wants to score the perfect goal all the times, but Meulenstein was like, well, actually, let's gamble. Let's get you in the box. Stop taking all those long shots. Let's get you in and get scrappy goals. All those goals that we see at Real Madrid. I think this all played a part in building him into the player that we'll be speaking about. But yeah, to go back to United as a tactical unit, they were really, really good this year. Their formation changed a bit between the Premier League and Europe, but I guess it was more how the players remained the same pretty much, but it was how they kind of used them in Europe. Carrick and Scholes would play a little bit deeper than they would in the Premier League, which you would expect. At times you'd have Park Ji-sung playing off a side. Owen Hargreaves, of course, plays off a side later on. Ronaldo pretty much predominantly starts on the right, but wants to drift inside. Just so fluid with him, Tevez, Rooney. Just creates so much chaos, so many rotations, things that you don't really think of as a Premier League team. I think it's certainly at this point, all that rotation, total football type stuff, but it really, really was this year. They were terrific this year. They really, really were. And I think in this group, which is a difficult group. You mentioned there Roma under Spalletti, absolutely no mugs at all.
Have you ever
really,
seen
really
a
well
performance though? Roma back to Old Trafford, where a side went, we know
again.
we're not going to win, but we are not going to get pumped. And they had to be coaxed out of their own half with cheese that night. But I don't blame them afterward. The roof had caved in the last time. A lesser spotted Gerard Piqué Manchester United goal in the return as well. I must admit that goal I had forgotten about. I so identify him with Barcelona.
He got 2 in this group stage for United. Yep. The one was that was the draw with Roma at the end, isn't it?
The end, yeah.
He'd already scored against Kyiv. But the game against Roma was the only game where Ronaldo, Rooney, or Tevez didn't score. One of them at least, sometimes two. Don't know if all three got on the act. Adam, sorry if I'm missing an obvious answer to this, but after this, we kind of get, especially Barcelona, the three becomes a thing and becomes known. You get this real harmony in threes, and it just becomes such a kind of trademark of a team, effectively. Had there been a three working as consistently and as iconically, perhaps, in football in the 20 years before Tevez, Rooney, and Ronaldo? Am I missing something really, really, really obvious? Probably back in the 70s, but certainly 80s and 90s, and early 2000s. None spring to mind.
No, I'm trying to rack my brains. I mean, you obviously have threes that do relatively well. We mentioned the Chelsea first couple of years under Mourinho, but it's
Milan years.
They're more defined. They're defined roles, right? That's two wingers and a target man. That's
yeah.
That's the kind of we've had two wingers and a target man and a number 10 for 20 odd decades. But no, I think in terms of what you're talking about, the fluidity, the rotations, literally every one of them could play everyone else's position. At that point, I don't think we'd seen it. And I still, again, I'm going to stop saying, well, actually, this person was underrated. But again, I don't know if Ferguson properly gets that. He should get more recognition for that, I think, because again, we're talking about, this is the third team here. They've all been very, very different. Each one has appeared perfectly suited to the decade, for want of a nice chop up, the decade that they're in. And I don't think he gets enough credit for that, because they were so and we weren't. I remember watching it thinking I'd never really seen this before. And then potentially when Barcelona come along and they're then taking that to the next level, and they obviously have a bit more European success, maybe that sort of dulls it a little bit in my mind, because you then focus on the next big thing that's coming up. But no, I certainly can't. I can't remember many. If there are, I'm sure if any listeners there's an obvious one that we're missing, but I certainly can't remember one that was so fluid and contributed so many goals. I think Tevez, Rooney, and Ronaldo in the league that year, I think they scored like 70% of the goals for Man United and 40% of the assists. So they were completely dominant in the way that we maybe know now with that Salah, Firmino, and Mane piece that will come along a bit later. But no, I'm not seeing any. I'm not feeling there's anything jumping out that we've missed. So they were, for me, the first of this 3-man attack that was so fluid. Yeah,
the work rate was something new, because Tevez and Rooney never stopped. And the thing about these three players is they would all have made functional to good players in different positions. You know, Rooney would have made a perfectly serviceable EPL midfielder. Tevez would have made a perfectly serviceable EPL midfielder. Ronaldo would have made a good old-fashioned centre forward due to his aerial power and his ability to sniff out goals, which is what he became, you know, at this, as we record it, the very late stage of his career. And their fluidity and their movement, but their work rate was exceptional. And they were a genuinely, you know, frightening force for teams to come up against, because they were liable to pop up in completely different places. How could you assign a man to pick someone up? Nor could you even say, right, okay, well, don't go man for man against them because they move about so much, so just occupy the space. Well, he's going to go back. He's going to drop back and get the ball and can play passes. Ronaldo's going to go where he feels like. Tevez is entirely comfortable. It was such a difficult thing to play against. And the shed loads of goals that they scored is a testament to that. But I really liked this United team. To me, there was a practicality about them that wasn't there in Ferguson's early days. But to me, this is the most exciting team he'd put together since the sort of mid-90s one, because there was just a controlled chaos about the front three. Rooney played like that. Tevez played like that. Ronaldo didn't play like that, but he benefited from those two playing that way, and he was always on hand to score it. And there was an authority to them that I thought that I hadn't seen from even Manchester United teams in the early 2000s that were still winning titles. I didn't think they played with the kind of level of authority that this one did. So it was a very fine team, but it did. To me, it's the first team that I really remember. Barcelona, as Adam says, then come along and do it in a slightly different way, where I thought, oh my goodness, everything starts at the front. Defending starts right at the front. Everything starts at the front, because you had two guys who would you mentioned in the last show, Martin, that Rooney would subsume himself into the team ethic. He'd play it on the left if he had to. He would drop into midfield. He would do doggies. He would go back and support a fullback. And Tevez at this stage in his career would do the same, and it gave them so many weapons to hurt you with.
This is what I mean about the whole Ferguson learning, evolution, adaptability piece. I think seeing, as much as I'm not a fan of it, seeing the out of possession approaches of Benitez and Jose Mourinho undoubtedly has to have an impact on the league.
Of course it does.
We see now, modern football wise, Guardiola has completely changed the landscape for better or worse, and we see teams that aren't capable of playing that way. I don't think there's any doubt that I think some of those learnings we mentioned there, Ferguson was absolutely humble enough to take the advice of Queiroz, Mjolnstein, all those guys bringing in experienced coaches alongside him. I think we'd be naive to think that he didn't see what was coming in terms of that out of possession approach that David mentions and incorporate it in. At a
but
time
still
where
have your overriding. But still have your override. I want to attack. These are attacking players. They score goals. The idea that you need to that you can't pick up things and meld them in and still maintain your overarching philosophy is, I think, where a lot of managers go wrong.
This is where let's park it just now, because I know we tend to go into the team who wins in a lot of detail. So we'll maybe come back to this conversation in a couple of weeks. But what I want to ask, and Adam has 2 weeks to think about it, is I would agree this is the most exciting United team since the mid-90s. And the reason why I think, and I think it came to its apotheosis in the semi-final next year, even though they didn't win the final, what they did to Arsenal at the Emirates, and we'll come to that in due course, was a perfect example of this. They're a counter-attacking team, like the mid-90s team was, and they counter-attacked in the most devastating and beautiful way possible. But they didn't have possession for possession's sake and all this kind of thing. And I think that's why that excitement comes in. It's counterintuitive. Counter-attacking usually means reactive and defensive, and letting your opponent do all the work. But I think this is why this United team is so devastating when it has pace. And also, did the Tevez opportunity just come up and Ferguson grabbed it and then thought, oh, I could do something with this? Or was it, I need a Tevez, I need someone who can give me this, and Hargreaves, and what does this give? So that's maybe to discuss in a couple.
We should ask our friend Rob that.
We should, and it's definitely in 2 weeks' time we're recording, and not 2 hours. So the next group, we have Inter. Adam, again, the team who benefits the most from Calciopoli, I think it's fair to say, holding trophy after trophy, coming up. 5 wins and a defeat. Don't know when that defeat comes at the very start, actually, to the surprise team, Fenerbahçe. It is PSV, who have been quite good in the last couple of seasons, who are relegated to that UEFA Cup spot, and CSKA Moscow with 1 point, absolutely rooting the bottom of the table. We'll come to Inter in a moment, because they're obviously going to go they're going to undergo change in the summer, as are Barcelona, and two managers who are going to, that story is going to dominate football for a decade and more. But what's happening in Fenerbahçe? What's happening in Istanbul?
So Zico is the coach here for Fenerbahçe, and they do very well. Another team that I wasn't expecting to really discuss, I don't think, but decent team. Roberto Carlos kicking a ball here for Fenerbahçe again was not something that I really remembered. He was there for a couple of years before he went back to Brazil, and yeah, they were good. You look through and they do have a few names that you obviously remember. Mattia Kezman is kicking about here. Colin Kazim Richards. They've got Alex as well. There's been so many
Not the
Brazilian
Chelsea
players called
Alex.
Alex. No, but this is a lesser known Alex who was at Parma. He went in the kind of peak of Serie A, turn of the century, but then was shipped out back to Brazil on loan. So not exactly a star Brazilian. Stephen Apaya, who again was a Serie A favourite of mine. Feel like he was potentially at Parma just after Rangers played them in those consecutive seasons. Diego Lugano as well, who was obviously really, really well thought of at PSG, and I think he was in the Premier League somewhere, but my memory has failing me. I want to say something like Stoke. I'm not sure that is true. So yeah, one of those teams that now you would look at in Turkey and think, oh yeah, dotted about with players that are maybe on their way down or players that are hoping to make a bit of money before they move on elsewhere. But they do have a really, really good season. PSV, no shame here. Even CSKA Moscow at this point, Wagner Love is there and banging them in. Joe as well. Remember Man City Joe? He starts
Everton as well. One of Everton's random bits of. Well, he must be good if they bought him transfers.
Yeah, but that's the whole Man City point of trying to become a big club and buying whoever will come to his situation. So yeah, I think that CSKA Moscow team they probably are unfortunate to finish with one goal, but 1 point. Sorry, but yeah, I think Fenerbahçe do well to certainly get the better of PSV Eindhoven for sure. They beat them 2-0 in Istanbul, and yeah, it comes down to basically Fenerbahçe winning their home games and beating CSKA Moscow by more, I think, which sees them go through. So yeah, but I think the start of this group for me is Ibrahimovic. I think he scores in pretty much every game, and two in a few of them, just completely unstoppable at this time. A modern striker. I've never really thought of Ibrahimovic, despite the height and despite the physicality. I've never thought of him remotely as a target man or a number 9 or anything like that. I've just sort of thought of him as a
force of nature.
Forward. Yeah, just a stands alone as a forward. If he was playing now, I wouldn't be too fussed if he played anywhere across the front 3 or the front 4, and I think he could do it. He just was terrific. Fantastic player, go on to great success with Inter, obviously, and then later after that, not quite a good fit at Barcelona, but then not everybody can be. But yeah, just a terrific player round about this point. And yeah, the main man at Inter for sure.
I think it was West Brom you were thinking of, Adam, earlier.
West Brom, Stoke.
So same.
Hopefully nobody will get offended in the comments if we've got West Brom and Stoke fans, but yeah.
David, if Zlatan wasn't such an insufferable wank, would he be more feted? And if he wasn't such an insufferable wank, would he have been as good as he was anyway? Is that just part of the package?
Yeah, it's 100% part of the package. That's who he is. It's also why, as Adam said there, he has the spell at Barcelona that doesn't work, because he will not be told what to do. And that's a manager who will not brook someone who will not be told what to do. That's why he goes to PSG, and the club basically, allows him away with anything he wants. He can do whatever he likes at PSG, which suits him right down to the ground. And yeah, I mean, you would remove an essential element of who he is or what he is. He was incredibly successful for the clubs he played for. Even at United, he wins a Europa League in his short time there. But, I do wonder about him in the modern game, like a 26-year-old Ibrahimovic now. Would he do the work? Would he? It's a question that's been asked about Mbappe, hasn't it? is he prepared to fit in with a team dynamic in the modern era? And it's a question that gets asked regularly. But you take away that some players, it's bravado, and some players you just think, no, that is exactly who they are. And I think in his case, he's the latter camp. I just think that's his personality, because I think, you read books at Ajax, he was like that, before he'd gone on to become. And I think when you are a bit of a kind of cartoon character, eventually the lines between the human and the character can become blurred. And I think that's what happened with him. But, you're absolutely right, Martin. I had he had a different, more... he would never have done what Rooney did at Man United. Can I put it that way? But then he wouldn't have been the player that he was. So it was up to the clubs to accept what you were getting in that package and make it work. And to be fair, there was a spell, Adam, for about 10 years where he was pretty much guaranteed if you wanted to win a Scudetto, you got your hands on Ibrahimovic. Yeah. So clubs couldn't, he earned his wages.
100%.
Okay, Docs, final group then. Arsenal are again our old Champions League friends. Start like a house on fire. 3 wins, 0 goals conceded, 11 scored, and still don't top the group. They have a bit of a wobble, drawing in Prague against Slavia, losing in Seville against Sevilla, and then kind of scrambling home to Stoja to eventually finish second to Sevilla. Come on to Adam to talk about Sevilla in a minute. David, they finished third in the Premier League. They made some decent signings. Diaby, I'm pretty sure, came in this window. Things that kind of made sense. In January, February time, they were top of the league. And Eduardo, their new striker, in the summer, had started to really make his mark and started to score goals, and that ended horrifically.
Yeah.
And Arsenal just did not recover. We talked about this United thing. This would be the second of their 3 titles in a row in 07-08. You just wonder.
You do. I hate lapsing into cliche and I hate lapsing into received wisdom, but this Arsenal team, I think, epitomises what the general feeling isn't always wrong. And this Arsenal team, there was a suspicion that they were a little bit too brittle at the core to maybe go on and achieve that title success. But I did feel that maybe Europe, therefore, would suit them a little more. They had some lovely footballers, and they were capable of football that was as good, if not better, than any team that we've discussed so far in this year's competition. When they were on it, the demolition job of Slavia Prague is so beautiful at times that you could put it to opera and hang it in the National Gallery. It was a wonderful performance. Cesc Fabregas is a joy at this point, pulling strings in the middle of the park. He also had that sort of a skill that I think he was a wonderful passer, as we all know, but at this point in his career, he had that almost Lampardian ability to run in, to get into the box on the end of things and finish moves off. And over the years, he would drop a little deeper, understandably, and become more of a central controlling midfielder. But at this point, he had that. You also got, look at the supporting cast, Alexander Hleb, you've got Walcott, yeah, you've got Bentner, who's weighing in with a few as well. Diaby, you mentioned earlier. And of course, they had so much skill in that side. It is a what if. You would never know. I think they would need to have been a side, Martin, that ran away with a title. And that's maybe unfair. And it's maybe based on the fact that I'm looking with hindsight at multiple failures, and who knows if they'd got over the line in this early iteration, what they would have gone on and done. But there was a sense that just at that last final hurdle, we talked there about a personality player. Is that what they were missing? Because they weren't missing the skill. right? Well, they're not missing a player that the rest can look at and say, well, he's capable of doing something to win us this game. They've got 7 of those. There's plenty of those. But did they have that spirit of resolve? And that's why I did always feel at this point, going into a season, that they may be more of a cup team. And I include the Champions League in it, because they were going to get through the group stage, right? Even as you say, after this, they switch off. They've got 10 points after 4 games, and they think, right, we're done. And they go to Sevilla and get beat. A very good Sevilla side that Adam's just about to talk about, incidentally, a Sevilla side I had a lot of time for. But yeah, there was just that suspicion of this Arsenal side that they could be bullied. And who knows if they'd got over the line this year, and we all know what happened to Eduardo, and it was horrendous. Who knows if that would have catapulted them on, and they could have been maybe an earlier iteration of City. I don't know. But at this point, I think there was a suspicion that teams in England knew, in terms of winning a title, that if you really, really ruffled them, and not in the most sporting fashion. Arsenal's problem is when a team gave them a bit, they bit. And they made it clear they didn't like it, and that's the worst thing you can do, because teams were just more, right, okay, they don't like this. That was Arsenal's problem. They couldn't not show how much they didn't like it. But when they were playing some of the football they played as a neutral, they were can't miss, because some of it was, we've seen those goals, the passing movements, the patterns of play are just like something from another planet. They were superb, but I just never had confidence in them. You mentioned there United. We'll talk about the semi-final later. United had a steal about them that they didn't quite have. Liverpool, in the previous few years, Chelsea, they had a steal that this Arsenal team just didn't seem to have. And in the clutch moments, you do need that, one or two of those guys. And maybe we've spoken about this before. Did he just have the ball? Could he have done with maybe 1 or 2 less number 10s and maybe 1 or 2 more guys who could come in and solidify it? That's one of the great talking points.
Adam, then Sevilla, first mention of them on this show, first Champions League entry in their history. 50 years since they were in the Champions Cup, beaten, of course, by Real Madrid in those days. Everyone had to at some point. But they're going to enjoy a very fruitful European run, more so in the Europa League, UEFA Cup, Europa League, but still they would be constant visitors to the Champions League. How did this start?
Yeah, so it's a couple of years before. I guess this 2007-2008 is Champions League, obviously, as we're talking about, but they won the UEFA Cup the 2 years before. So that's 2006 and 2007, as we record in 2024. 18 years later, they've won a ridiculous 7 times, I think, which is just unprecedented for that competition anyway. Certainly not the big competition, but yeah, they're kind of coming to the fore here. This game that sort of grabbed my attention certainly was that Arsenal game, the 3-1 in Sevilla. Arsenal's first defeat of the season, and I think their first since quite near the start of the year, something like 30 games, I'm sure it was. But I think David is spot on. I think, again, it's who plays well and who doesn't play well. If we focus on this game particularly, Arsenal do field a rotated team in that game because of how well things have went. But I think Sevilla are really, really good. And I think there's just that point. I think Wenger he gets sent to the stand, actually, loses the plot at a refereeing decision, I think not for the first time. And he... yeah, you can sort of see that. But I think David nails it with Arsenal specifically, that the lack of steel. I think he does just go too far. And I think we actually got a message, I think, to say that we maybe could have been a little bit harsh in Arsenal in a couple of years before this, certainly in the Champions League final, in terms of how it went. And for me, I think it is just maybe that bitterness, maybe, or that, that's the wrong word for it, but just the fact that it was a wee bit unrequited, if you like, or it was a wee bit. It didn't quite go where it could have went. I think with that Arsenal team in terms of getting into Europe and getting to the end and finally getting over the line. And I think that steady descent now for me is quite apparent. So I almost just disregard them as probably not helpful as that is. But they did have some great players. But I think they're just missing. Best way to describe it for me is they're probably missing the Tony Adams and Patrick Vieira. I think at this point, if they have those two in this team, the defence never really filled me with confidence, even when it was playing well with Vermaelen and Koscielny coming to the fore and Clichy and those guys. They just good players, but they're missing those two guys. I think certainly. But anyway, I digress. Sevilla, lots and lots of fun at this point. Obviously, in this game, Fergie Queiroz seals the victory, which I'm sure would please the Spurs fans. Gives them a little bit of happiness in Europe, which they've not really had. But he seals the victory, and he's there. He's the main man here for me. Getting on a bit, 30 probably around about this time. But yeah, really, really fun team. Sevilla, they have Juan de Ramos here for the first part of the season. Not by this point, I don't think. I think he'd gone to Spurs at this point. Something I'm sure he very much regrets. But he
last
had moved
Spurs manager to win a trophy, Adam.
Oh yeah, that's true. But yeah, he was there at this point, and then he was replaced by Manolo Jimenez, who would be there for a few years, and I think win them another UEFA Cup, which will be no surprise to anybody. But yeah, just a wee bit of insight in here. He's Jesus Navas, who's another one of those players that we mentioned who is just starting to appear, but is also still playing at the time of recording. He's back at Sevilla now. Dani Alves, who again we have to stress we'll be discussing on field only. One of those before you were. It's almost like those before you were famous things. You ever watch something on the TV and you get really into it, and then you randomly watch something from 10 years before and the actor's in it, and you're like, what are you doing here? It kind of feels like that when you're watching Dani Alves 2007, 2008, because it's before he moves to Barcelona, and I'm probably devote a full episode to how he revolutionised the fullback position in his time there. But he's here just now. Jesus Navas, I mentioned. They've got a lot of firepower. Aruna Kone, who I really, really liked as well as a centre forward, is there too. Fabiano, we mentioned he scored a couple of goals in here. He has a really, really good time at Sevilla at this stage. And then they've got those players that you need. Christian Poulsen, a very mid-2000s defensive midfielder. Enzo Maresca here as well, currently doing very, very well with Chelsea. He was here. I think this must be after he was certainly after he was at Juve, but I think there was a stop at Fiorentina or something as well. So he's kicking about. Having Navarro, just a quite a un-Spanish team. This for me, it's almost like a kind of Premier League team at this point. I'm not sure if I'm just saying that because Canuti's here, Federico Fazio is here, those type of players are here, but it's very very workmanlike at points, but lots and lots of firepower. Kone, Luis Fabiano, Frederic Canuti make them very, very fun. Diego Capel as well, one of those sort of, again, mid-2000s wingers that would pop up for a few years, score a few goals and disappear again. So yeah, they do very well to get through. Their debut in the Champions League, as we mentioned. It's also Slavia Prague's debut in the Champions League. I think one plays like it's their debut and one very much doesn't. But yeah, they do well to go through and they win the group. So fair play to Sevilla on that.
And that will do us, gents, 2 whole shows on a group stage. The whole main event, the Champions League, is really spiraling out of control. What will you think of next? Thank you, David.
Yeah, they'll come up with some daft little 32 teams in the same league, but not playing the same sides. It'll be something crazy like that.
Here, I'm a fan. Adam, thank you.
Thank you.
On to the knockouts next week. Bye for now.
If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, search for And It's Live Podcast. We've got new deep dives, drafts and breakdowns dropping every other day.